Hot as it is, and it is hot, it's still a beautiful day in our neighborhood. It's especially beautiful because it is the summer solstice, which means we have more daylight today than any other day of the year. It's Father's Day. Already, I'm sure some of you have given and received greetings from fathers, present, absent, in heart or in mind. And we are observing the first official Juneteenth as a nation. Of course, that, as good as it is but another brick in the long road toward justice. But it is laid, and we can walk a step further than we could before. So let us rejoice in the hope it betokens, not just in the accomplishment itself. And give thanks to those who made it happen and renew our own commitment to keep marching. I am Fred Wooden. I am the interim minister for this wonderful community called Valley Unitarian Universalist Congregation, located in Chandler, but present throughout the country and even beyond the borders of the United States. But we are gathered as one people here, as we do every week. And I would now like to make sure that we begin this worship in the most powerful way we have by lighting the chalice. I'm going to ask Barbara Metz, who played our prelude and is our worship associate, to lead us in doing that.
Thank you, Fred. If you would gather your candles, and we will light them together with the words, "We kindle this flame, symbol of our faith, for the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of love, which calls us to work for justice." And now I believe Marcy is up.
Told I'm not coming across. Okay. So now is the time to bring any children that are in your household in front of your device for our Time for All Ages. In the meantime, I want to share with you that our pastoral care associate today is Melissa Bush. You can contact them using the email pastoralcare@vuu.org, or you can use the chat feature in Zoom. The names are alphabetical. You look for Melissa Bush. Remember that the chat is restricted during the prayer and meditation and the sermon. So feel free to post or chat your joys and concerns before or after those parts of the service. So our Time for All Ages today is in honor of the summer solstice. And I found this fabulous book. If anybody has any access to this book, I would appreciate it because it's an exorbitant price everywhere I've looked. It's called The Longest Day, Celebrating the Summer Solstice by Wendy Pfeiffer, illustrated by Linda Bleck. People around the world have long revered the life-giving sun, and the different cultures have celebrated the return of the summer season. Enjoy this wonderful book that shows us all the different ways that summer solstice is celebrated.
The Longest Day, Celebrating the Summer Solstice by Wendy Pfeiffer, illustrated by Linda Bleck. As summer approaches in the northern part of the world, bison shed their heavy coats, mountain goats climb to sunny pastures, and with a splash of color, butterflies emerge from silky cocoons. At this time of year, the sun appears early each morning, rises higher into the sky each day, and lingers long into the evening. Days become longer and warmer, and crops grow and ripen. Around June 21st, the first day of summer, as Earth moves in its orbit, the northern half of the Earth tilts toward the sun, and so it gets more sunshine than the southern half. The first day of summer, called the summer solstice, has more daylight hours than any other day of the year, making it the longest day. The sun spreading warmth and light has always been important to people. Warm sunshine and more daylight hours make for good growing season to supply life-giving food. The sun was so valuable to people who lived in ancient times that some considered it one of their gods. Egyptians believed their sun god, Ra, sailed in a golden boat across the sky. The Greeks thought their sun god, Apollo, drove a chariot through the heavens, and the sun was one of the blazing wheels. Early people observed and recorded how the sun appeared to move through the sky. Ancient Greeks measured the shadows of a tall pillar. The shortest shadow occurred on the longest day in the summer, when the midday sun was high in the sky. The longest shadow appeared on the shortest day in winter, when the midday sun was low in the sky. The people of the Chumash tribe in California painted a sunburst around an opening in the ceiling of a cave. They called it the House of the Sun. During mid-afternoon on the longest day, the sun's rays streamed through the opening, and when the sunlight beamed onto a quartz crystal that was wedged into the ground, the Chumash welcomed summer solstice. 5,000 years ago in England, people began building structures to mark these special times of the year. One prehistoric monument, Stonehenge, consists of a circle of stones. Some line up with the summer solstice sunrise. Others line up with the winter solstice sunset. Similar yet puzzling stone structures cover Mystery Hill in New Hampshire. Some call it America's Stonehenge. While Stonehenge is neatly arranged, Mystery Hill is a jumble of stones, many etched with ancient inscriptions. Early on June 21st, visitors flocked to Mystery Hill. They watched the sun come up over Sunrise Stone, marking the beginning of the longest day. In Wyoming, during mid-June, thousands of people hike up Medicine Mountain to see Bighorn Medicine Wheel. Scientists and archaeologists believe the Plains Indians constructed this 80-foot wide circle of rocks between 200 and 800 years ago. 28 spokes radiate out from a central hub. One spoke points to the summer solstice sunrise and another to the summer solstice sunset. Over 700 years ago in Lithuania, villagers celebrated the longest day by washing their faces with morning dew, then singing, dancing, and feasting. They coated a wheel with tar, covered it with straw, and set it afire on top of a hill to symbolize the sun at the highest point in the sky. Then they rolled it down the hill towards a river to symbolize the sun moving through the sky. If the wheel was still burning as it hit the water, they believed the summer sun would produce a bountiful harvest. Today, Lithuanians and people in many other countries celebrate St. John's Day on June 24th with festivities from sunup to sundown. The days around the summer solstice have been called midsummer because June 21st is about midway between May and August. On Midsummer's Eve, ancient Germanic tribes built fires. They thought the fire would help the sun warm the earth and drive away unwanted spirits. They believed the bigger the fire, the farther away those spirits would move. And couples used to jump over the fires, hoping that the summer crops would grow as high as they could jump. On land that lies above the Arctic Circle, the sun shines for 24 hours on June 21st. In Sweden, it's called the day that never ends. Towns will often set up a midsummer pole, strewn with streamers and flowers, flags and greens. Villagers wear folk costumes and play traditional music and dance around the pole. Each year, the people of Nome, Alaska celebrate the summer solstice with a midnight sun festival. On June 21st, the sun shines for more than 22 hours. People parade, barbecue, and dance in the streets. And if the ice is broken up on the Bering Sea, the annual polar bear swim is held. Brave people dip their entire bodies in the almost freezing water to celebrate the longest day. During the hot weather, the days shorten and summer soon ends. Leaves fall, cool winds blow. Bison start growing heavier coats. Mountain goats wander down to the windless pastures, and monarch butterflies migrate south to the warm skies of Mexico. The Earth continues its orbit around the sun until the next year, when people in the northern part of the earth will once again enjoy the summer solstice and the longest day of the year.
We will now sing our opening hymn, The Sweet June Days. This English melody was arranged by the wonderful English composer Ralph Vaughan Williams, and words are from Samuel Longfellow. Blake, can you pull that up?
The sweet June days are come again, once more the glad earth yields her golden wealth of ripening grain and breath of clover fields, and evening shade of summer wood and glow of summer air, and winging thoughts and happy moods of love and joy and prayer. The sweet June days are come again, the birds are on the wing, bright anthems in their merry strain, unconsciously they sing. Oh, how our cup o'erbrims with good these happy summer days, for all the joys of field and wood we lift our song of praise.
Good morning. We are so glad that you have chosen to worship with us this morning at Valley Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Barbara Metz, and as a member of this congregation, I have the honor of serving as your lay presence for this morning's worship service. We are a congregation that believes that we all contribute to the sacredness of Sunday morning. Without you and you, we have nothing. We are all enriched by each other, as we are all changed by each other's presence. Whether you are new to VUU or you've been part of us for decades or somewhere in between, your presence on Sunday morning is sacred. Thank you for that vital offering, because without our community, what are we? At the end of today's service, we hope you will join us in a breakout room. If you are in fact new to us, please consider instead staying in the main room and meeting with Reverend Fred. He will be there to answer any questions you might have about VUU or Unitarian Universalism in general. Fred's sermon title, Musing on the Spheres, created a bit of reaction in my brain. If you put the words muse and sphere next to each other in a sentence, I, and probably any musician, will hear music of the spheres rather than musing on the spheres. And knowing the musician within Reverend Fred, I feel quite confident that his title is no accident, but rather a fully intentional play on words. So Fred, have fun playing with those words, because musing on the spheres might just put a touch of order to life, which is also what music and the spheres is all about. And I like order. As a musician myself, I can't help but to muse a bit first on music in the spheres. The connection between music, mathematics, and astronomy are undeniable. Almost all of Western music is put into order by something called the harmonic series or the overtone series. This overtone series is a sequence of frequencies or musical tones in which each frequency is an integer multiple of the fundamental. It is how we get the 12 notes we use in Western music. They have not been created randomly. They are created by this mathematical formula, a ratio that creates them. Each note derived by a naturally occurring overtone series. The organization of musical pitch is the result of the spheres. And rhythm, which is how music is organized in time, is of course also ordered by the spheres. So I say, thank goodness for the spheres. They give us ways to create and organize, among other things, our music. I could give an entire sermon or lecture on music in the spheres, but that's not what I'm here for. Instead, I want to share my internal conversation that was spurred by Reverend Fred's sermon title, which began with the music, as I just shared, but soon traveled on to the order I try to create in my personal everyday life. Order, which for me creates calm. And without calm, I can't find spiritual or any other harmony. My everyday creating of order is far less complicated than the order created by the spheres, but rather something over which I feel I have some control. I make my bed first thing every morning, usually before I leave the bedroom. After all, a made bed gives me a sense that things are under control. Perhaps it's a false sense, but I'm allowed to fool myself if I wish. I walk to the kitchen and make coffee, and again, the order of the kitchen cleared up after dinner helps me to feel a sense of order. As I start my day, sitting down at my desk, the piano or the cello, I will straighten any items that are out of place, and only then will my mind find calm and peace, allowing me to work on the task at hand. I could go on and on about my little obsessive habits that bring me a sense of order, but I'll keep the rest of it to myself. But having order in my everyday life, whether I create it or the spheres do, gives me a sense of having some control, a sense that life is okay, that the universe is in order. It's a bit like the feeling I get when a piece of music ends and all the dissonance that the composer created gets put back to order. That moment when I can go, ah. Imagine how unsettled you would feel if you didn't get that final cadence, that final chord, and were just left hanging without the composer putting things back into order. So I look forward to hearing what Reverend Fred does with this musing on the spheres. And now I turn it over to Fred.
Well, after such a poetic and spiritual welcome, I'm really about some pretty prosaic business here. But I want to go back to my invitation to worship. Remember when I said that Juneteenth was a brick in the pavement, in the walkway, the path toward racial justice, another step that we have laid. And I want to ask you now, what brick would you lay down on the road to justice? We all have that capacity. In fact, that's what I believe we all exist to do, is to add value to the world we're in. We all have the power to pave the way toward a better world. I think often of the great Unitarian minister, but probably better known author, Edward Everett Hale, the fellow who wrote The Man Without a Country, whose words keep me going sometimes when I don't want to. He wrote, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can still do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." We can all do something. And the offering is that moment when you recognize, no, your gift will not save the church. It won't provide a perfect answer, but it is a brick in the pavement toward the future. It really does matter. So, as I say every week, and here's how that other slide comes up: text, email, click, call, write. Do the something you can do and make another step possible toward that world we all want to see come into being. Thank you so much.
And now this is our time for centering. The time when we try to let our energy level dissipate just a little bit. I invite you to settle in and enjoy this solstice chant video, which was created for a ceremony for humanity. Blake, can you put that up now?
To the light in our hearts, to the light in our hearts, sing praise, sing praise. To the light in our hearts, to the light in our hearts, sing praise, sing praise. Light in our bodies, light in our souls, light in our spirits, and light in our hearts. To the light in our hearts, to the light in our hearts, sing praise, sing praise. To the light in our hearts, to the light in our hearts, sing praise, sing praise. Light in our bodies, light in our souls, light in our spirits, and light in our hearts. To the deep, dark silence that nurtures our winter hearts, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise. To the deep, dark silence that nurtures our winter hearts, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise.
A time devoted to what some would call prayer, which is not meditation, but they keep close company. It may seem right now that the world is out to get us, at least down here in Arizona. It's hot, it's dry. Just when it was getting to be safe enough to come out of our burrows because of the pandemic, the heat is forcing us back inside again. It feels very unfair, at least to me. But of course, that's not true. The pandemic isn't trying to get us. The heat isn't trying to get us, nor is the drought. There's no agency here. What is true is that the world does not need us to be the world. We could vanish and the world would be here. And some would argue it might be better off. Reality is that we need the world much more than it needs us. And there's a phrase, to stand in need. That's really what prayer is, acknowledging that you stand in need. There's a spiritual by that name, standing in the need of prayer. What could be less you than admitting you stand in need of something? We are rugged individualists. We're self-reliant. We're rational. We are self-directed. And yet, if we acknowledge reality in any significant way, we are dependent on each breath that we haven't taken, on each meal that we haven't eaten. We are in need at every moment. And to admit we are in need is why we have families, communities, congregations. So when we say we stand in need, that's just to admit we're human. The naked ape, did some writer call it years ago, unprotected by, for unable to function and survive on our own. It's the aloneness that I want to point to, because we all feel it. Moments of aloneness where we feel weak or vulnerable, and that is what prayer is about. Not to be saved from it, but to acknowledge it. So I want you to pause and number the ways you stand in need right now. Perhaps not in the way that our friends from iHelp need us to be a shelter because they don't have homes. Perhaps not in the way those in hospitals need care because we are fortunate to be at home. Perhaps not in the way of those who are unemployed and are wondering about the rent. But we all stand in need. And if we all knew that, and if we all said that, and if we all acknowledged that, then the differences that we think matter would all fall away because we all stand in need. All of us. Every day. And therefore, to stand in need, as hard as it can be, is one of the greatest gifts we can receive. And so when you receive a gift, the answer is always thank you. And so we thank fate, existence, God, spirit, whatever it is, because it has no name, for making us creatures who stand in need. For only in need can we understand how much we have in common and how we all need one another in ways that will never end. Let us be grateful that we stand in need. Amen.
Hi, this is Andrew Seifert. This song is called Jacket in the Rain, and it is a song from a father to a father that I wrote. Father of mine, you gave me the time to see the world through your eyes, as sometimes you saw mine and then I'd find with the kids I have it's harder than it looks. Please hear me out, my heart has been without compassion and forgiveness. I'd sometimes have a doubt if you mind, and then I'd find with the kids I have I've never had a doubt. 'Cause as a father, love could look like all sorts of things. As a father, love could be a wink, a joke, or a game. It could be his jacket in the rain. As we're getting old, there's so much untold. I find vulnerability could lead me to gold, and I find you. And I could look you in the eye today and say, I love you. 'Cause as a father, love could look like all sorts of things. As a father, love could be a wink, a joke, or a game. It could be his jacket in the rain.
So how we doing? I had so many choices this Sunday. I've already mentioned them. There's Juneteenth, which is worthy of a great sermon. There's Father's Day, and thank you, Andrew, for talking about that. Something I did this morning because the time zones allowed me, as I talked to my son, who is a first-time father just 2.5 weeks ago. I got to tell you, being a father is great. Being a father of a father is even better. It feels as though you've done something that will last. And we all want to do something that lasts. I want to talk about, though, that other thing, the solstice, which is the most abstract of all three of those things. I don't know why, but it got in my head a few weeks ago that this was worth talking about. Today really is the summer solstice, right here, right now, the longest period of daylight that we will enjoy here in the northern hemisphere. Of course, it's the winter solstice below the equator, and I'll get to that in a minute. I know that this is a fact that's almost as old as fatherhood. Because even before humans were writing things down, they knew about solstices and equinoxes and stuff. I know that because I went to see Stonehenge a few years ago. And I know that we know nothing about that culture because they didn't write it down in ways, at least that we can read. But that place was designed to notice the solstices. And Stonehenge is not unique. Back in 2016, I hiked up to Machu Picchu, which was a considerable task, and did not know until I got there that there is a design to that whole place to acknowledge the winter solstice, which, as I mentioned before, is that same date in June that we are acknowledging now. And then I didn't remember until I thought about it that when I was in Beijing a few years ago, there was a great ancient temple, since rebuilt, the Temple of Heaven, which has a sacred altar that's used only for the winter solstice. And again, something I did not know until I got here, that down there in Casa Grande, the great house, one of the few great houses still in existence, there is a hole in the western wall that's designed to catch the rays of the sun as it goes down on the longest day of the year. And those are just 4 easy examples of cultures that consciously try to synchronize their lives with the sun. And there are lots more. I'm sure most ancient cultures did it. And I mention all this because in the last generation or so, there's been renewed interest in these ancient ways, especially among Unitarian Universalists, and of what they call earth-based traditions. They vary in their content and in their names, but they seek to honor those ancient ways that connected deliberately to nature. And I like that word nature more than earth-based because it isn't just the earth, it is the sun, it is the moon, it is the things beyond the earth that affect them. These primitive ways are obviously what those major religions, the ones we know now, spent a lot of times trying to wipe out. And in large measure, they did. Thousands of cultures have been obliterated. But they didn't obliterate them all or entirely. You see, we keep backsliding into it and have from the very outset. If you read your Hebrew scriptures, and maybe you do, you'll notice that the Israelites keep backsliding into old ways all the time. They're told to give up their idols, and yet they make them, to give up other gods, and yet they worship them. Christianity tried also to obliterate the paganism of Rome, and Islam tried hard to suppress the idol worship around it. But Christmas still somehow falls on the winter solstice, and that can't be an accident. And Islamic months are tied to the moon. And why is that? Even these great religions still respond to the spheres. My point, I guess, is that we are all pagans, whether we call ourselves that or not. And that's fine, because nature is quite literally inside us. For example, you are carrying around in your body right now more microbes than there are people on the earth, and they are keeping you alive. They are not a danger to you. They are part of you. Did you know, as I looked up this week, that we share 60% of our DNA with fruit flies, chickens, and bananas? You're 60% fruit, 60% insect, 60% Kentucky Fried. We are all quite literally inside nature, and it's inside us. And it is this sense of being embedded in it and of it that every pagan religion understood, even if it didn't have words to go with it. All those traditions and all those cultures shared a sense that nature was big and we are small, and we'd better figure out how to deal with that or else. Now, I want to consider the word pagan for a minute, because we hear neo-pagan and other things, and they sometimes have a pejorative quality. It helps to know that pagan is a Latin word that means someone fixed, located. It's equivalent to the word peasant, which is a French version of pagan. And we think of peasants as people of the soil. In English, we have the word heathen, which means someone from the heath. Remember Wuthering Heights out there on the moors, that kind of rustic people whose lives are tied to the earth and to the soil, to the seasons, to the sun. They meant also someone who was not civilized, a bumpkin, hillbilly. We all remember that. And that word is important to remember, that when we say someone's a heathen or a pagan, we sometimes mean someone who is uncivilized. Now, of course, what you may not remember is the word civil comes from the word for city. So we're contrasting people who live in urban and rural environments. It's a class thing. It's a class thing. This fact that we are part of nature, but also struggling with that nature, is where so much of modern religion stumbles. And I understand why. Religions are about societies. They define and govern human interactions. None of the 10 Commandments, for example, involves nature at all. They're all about other people. As humans became more organized and urban, they could control each other more and nature more. And nature suddenly, or not so suddenly actually, but ultimately became an object to be used, not something to be feared. And that was good. Who wants to live in constant fear of what nature can do? But in the meantime, as we lost our fear of nature, we also lost our wonder of it. Trees that held spirits turned into lumber. The rivers that had demons that kept us on the shore turned into highways governed by boats and canals. The mountains upon which sat gods and lightning turned into mines from which we dragged iron. And religions underline that by saying humans have dominion over nature, that humans did so because humans had souls and nature did not, that the spiritual, therefore, the rational was superior to the merely physical. But nature wasn't paying attention to that. It's kind of like the way if you put down a sidewalk in a neighborhood and a few years later it begins to buckle because the trees underneath it insist on growing. Or how in a parking lot, the moment there's a crack, there seems to be grass growing through it. Nature is exceedingly slow, but it never gives up. And I think that's my point, that modern neo-paganism is asking us to acknowledge the continued power and spiritual power of nature. We forget that the great Renaissance and Enlightenment of Europe were really nature worship in a whole new way. And that's what I want to lift up, is that we're not at war with nature, that we're trying to find our place in it as we know more about it. Modern science was not about trying to control nature, it was about trying to understand it and appreciate it. A spirituality, if you will, that saw nature as something full of wonder and knowledge and wisdom, not just evil or danger. And nor was the Renaissance the only Renaissance, and the Enlightenment the only Enlightenment. I was in Jaipur, India, a few years ago, and in the garden of the prince's palace are immense, oddly shaped objects that are called a jantar mantar. It's an observatory. There are no lenses, but they're designed to calculate all the motions of the sun and the stars and the moon and the earth. It was built in 1734. And I marveled at how these large instruments could tell time down to the minute, could predict eclipses, could tell us when the seasons would begin. And they're also beautiful. They were meant to be beautiful objects as well as instruments. The Prince Jai Singh was a student of astronomy, and he learned from Europeans. But he did it because Hinduism and Islam needed to know days and months and years. It was almost 2 centuries earlier that Nicholas Copernicus saw his book published while on his deathbed. But it was another man altogether, Nasr al-Din al-Tusi, the Islamic theologian and astronomer who anticipated Copernicus and may have been the source of his insight, forgetting also that Copernicus himself was religious, was a theologian as well. There is a through line from the heel stone of Stonehenge to the telescope of Galileo to the Jantar Mantar of Jaipur, right up to Einstein and Sagan. And they do not part religion from science. Do you know who came up with the Big Bang Theory? It wasn't Albert Einstein. It was Georges Lemaitre, Father Georges Lemaitre, priest, who also formulated Hubble's law. Our spiritual ancestor, Joseph Priestley, was an Anglican clergyman, liberal, Unitarian, and a scientist, as much as he was a preacher. In that sense, that science is a spiritual process, still exists. I grew up with it as a boy in the Unitarian Universalist Church because I remember in it hymns like the one called The Spacious Firmament on High, which comes out of Joseph Haydn's Creation. We've almost all sung that at least once. And then there was a contemporary of Joseph Priestley, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, a fellow named Erasmus Darwin, who penned a poem that I sang as a hymn. Roll on, ye stars, exult in youthful prime, mark with bright curves the printless steps of time. Flowers of the sky, ye too must age and yield, frail as your silken sisters of the field. And it goes on and on. A panegyric, a lyric, an ode to nature and its glory, its power, and its spiritual richness. That spiritual thrill was in science once, but I'm afraid it has been obscured by the fundamentalisms of religion on the one hand and of science on the other. But it's always present and available if we look for it. To have to choose between spirit and mind, faith and reason, that's a false choice. That's like choosing whether I should be a human or an ape, even though I'm 99% each. That's a choice promoted by the Savonarola's of our day, who think they can purify us in some way, either scientifically or religiously, when that's not possible. As far back as Pythagoras, the half-legendary Greek man, mathematician, mystic, scientist, who first put together that notion of the music of the spheres. It was he who thought that somehow there was a divine, mystical proportion that existed between everything in the universe. He was the first to string a monochord, and discovered that if you plucked that chord and touched it halfway, it made a different sound, what we would call an octave today. Thank you, Barbara Metz, for pointing that out. And other intervals, if you touch that chord. And then he wondered, did that apply in other places too? And imagine that there was literally a musica universalis, a universal music, not one we could hear, but one that governed the way the entire universe was organized. He wasn't right about the details, but the insight that it's all one fabric, living by one pattern of laws, that's still true. It is a short mental step from Pythagoras to Maria Mitchell, 19th century woman astronomer, perhaps also a Unitarian or Universalist, who at one point said every formula which expresses a law of nature is a hymn of praise to God. I wish we could be that poetic again. It was a hot August day in St. Louis back in 2017. We were in a little park off of Highway 44, patiently awaiting the universe to put on its show of shows. Through our special glasses, we watched the moon slowly creep in front of the sun, but not until the very end did we sense a difference in the light around us. Ever so slowly, then quite quickly, things changed. I saw it coming, the shadow. I saw it coming, actually, literally coming, as the umbra of the moon came across the United States. It started in the northwest and headed to the southeast, and it crossed the entire United States, that shadow of the moon in front of the sun. It crossed the United States in 90 minutes. It went 1,000 miles an hour. A shadow as large as the moon, traveling at 1,000 miles an hour. I looked off to the northwest and saw a gray darkness in the sky, and it was terrifying. And yet, when it reached us, there was a calm that was startling. And through our glasses, we saw the sun's corona become visible, and the diamond ring as the moon began to move ever so slightly beyond the sun. That was thrilling. I shouted, literally shouted, laughed impulsively, needing to make some noise in response. How could one not want to do something when beholding such an event? Annie Dillard wrote, "What you see in an eclipse is entirely different from what you know of an eclipse." Amen, sister. You've seen the photographs, you may have seen them in a planetarium, but when it happens to you, it is overwhelming. I can understand why people go around the world looking for more eclipses. They could be addictive. You really have to be there, and there's going to be a few, so make sure you get to one. For that little moment, the music of the spheres was audible. The intervals of earth and sun and moon were visible. I heard Pythagoras' monochord. I sensed the fundamental frequency of the sun, the overtones of moon and earth. What could I do but shout in response to such a musical moment? Annie Dillard says something else, and I'll close with her words. What have we been doing all these centuries but trying to call God back to the mountain, or failing that, raise a peep out of anything that isn't us? What is the difference between a cathedral and a physics lab? Are they not both saying hello? Hello indeed. That is what it means to be part of nature, to greet it and to wait for it to greet us. Greet the world, comrades. And whether you hear the music of the spheres or not, know that it is happening, and you are part of that song. That's enough, I think. Amen. And I'll let Barbara Metz help us sing our final hymn.
Our final hymn, our closing song is I Am a Light, and it is sung and performed by our music director, Katie Seifert, and her husband, Andrew. Blake, can you put that up now?
This is I Am a Light by Robert Anderson, and we invite you to sing along. It's a call and repeat.
Well, let me give you a couple of quick words. Let's back up, Izzy, one more time. There we go. Because I want you to hear some more words by Maria Mitchell, the wonderful astronomer from the 19th century. Not only the sparrow's fall is felt to the uttermost bound, she said, but the vibrations set in motion by the words we utter reach through all space, and the tremor is felt through all time. That is a spirituality of science. With a hope like that in our hearts, we give thanks for our wings and our words, promising that we shall use them for a greater good than ourselves, a greater beauty than we have made, and a greater truth than we yet know. Barbara, help us finish this hour and lead us in extinguishing the chalice.
So as we extinguish our chalice, join me in the words. Though we extinguish the chalice, our connection to each other and this community remains. May its light guide us this week as we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, and fill our world with compassion until we meet again. And now, if you're going to join a breakout room, please hang around for a minute till they get things set up, and then you will be directed to one. And if you are new and wish to meet with Reverend Fred, just stay in the main room. You don't have to do anything, and he will join you shortly. Thank you for being here, everyone.
Hey, everybody should be able to unmute themselves.
Hey.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Libby.
How are ya?
Libby,
Hanging in.
Libby, will you shut down the live stream?
Yeah.
Thank you.